The White House says we can expect to see a significantly higher National Guard presence on the ground throughout Washington, D.C. by tonight. A senior Army official tells NBC that the first troops began deploying with local police last night. Their focus, security and crowd management, not making arrests or performing direct law enforcement. But a White House official says that multi-agency teams have made more than 100 arrests since the deployment was announced. And as the Washington Post notes, the arrival of the National Guard brings with it uncertainty over command of the D.C. police. I want to bring in a member of the D.C. Metropolitan Police Department, Officer Daniel Hodges, who was on duty during the January 6th assault on the Capitol when he was violently beaten by the mob. I want to thank you for being on the program. Officer Hodges, do you know who's in charge of law enforcement in the nation's capital right now? How do things feel out there?
Thanks for having me, Chris. Speaking on my own behalf and not on behalf of my employer, as far as I know, the chain of command has not changed, at least for the day-to-day police officers in D.C. The emergency federalization doesn't make a lot of sense to me because deploying these National Guard troops to D.C., I served as a Virginia National Guard member for 6 years, and I can tell you that this is not what they're trained to do. Soldiers are trained to fight and win wars. We're not in a war out here in D.C. It's there's crime out here, but it's not a war-torn hellscape like Trump has said. It's the troops are not trained to do law enforcement. This is not their lane. This is not what they're supposed to be doing.
So what could be realistically expected of them? Because, as I said, the White House put out this statement and they said multi-agency teams. I think, for example, if you want to talk about managing crowds, yes, certainly for big events, there are crowds in Washington, D.C. I don't know, having lived there for 3 years on a day-to-day basis, that we see huge crowds of people necessarily around Washington. What do you make of a kind of partnership? Can it be useful?
Yeah, I'm not aware of any enormous events that warrant the deployment of hundreds of National Guard units for crowd control. With regards to federal partners, we could always use more hands, but I don't think this is really their specialization either. So many of these federal officers are investigators. They're supposed to be behind a desk, working that way, but they're not. You're going to see them standing around in Chinatown or on the mall or walking around Georgetown. They're not going east of the river. They're not doing what really needs to be done around here for help. So it could be helpful, but I don't think it's going to be.
I wonder and maybe you've had these conversations with your fellow officers, your partner. What did you think when you heard the president? He's suggested this before when he describes D.C. as being crime-ridden, a hellscape. Do you feel it's a personal attack on you and your fellow officers?
No, I don't think it's a personal attack on the police when he says that. Like, there is crime in D.C. I'm not going to pretend there isn't, but it's not exactly Mogadishu out here. It's very. There are things that the federal government can do to help. First of all, is actually allow D.C. to spend its own money. Right now, we're $1 billion in the hole, and the government can't approve the raise that's already been signed for D.C. police. So there's one thing. FEMA also slashed its assistance to D.C. police by, I think, 44%, just for whatever reason that they want to cut government spending for. So there are things that they can do to help us out that they're not doing, and I would love to know why.
Well, at a D.C. press conference yesterday, U.S. Attorney Jeanine Pirro stood next to the photos of some teenagers killed by gunfire over the last 2 years to argue that gun violence in the city requires an emergency response. She disputes the numbers that have been reported by the D.C. Police Department that show a decrease in violent crime. Listen.
There is a whole community that is suffering because of the violent crime in this district. And anyone who wants to tell me the crime is down and that we don't need an emergency focus on crimes of violence, all they need to do is take a look at this and talk to the loved ones and the family members of these individuals, all shot and killed.
There is no one who will dispute the tragedy of gun violence or the loss of life or attacks on individuals. As you say, no one is suggesting that things couldn't get better in Washington and every major city probably in America. But is your experience that those numbers are right? That, in fact, crime is down in Washington, D.C., that you and your fellow officers have helped to make Washington, D.C. safer than it was last year, 2 years, 3 years ago?
Well, I'm just a regular old patrol officer. I'm not in charge of the statistics. I can tell you that I classify my reports as accurately as I can. I can tell you that everyone I work with works diligently to patrol the streets and make sure that we serve the community with law enforcement purposes in mind. With regards to the overarching statistics, I don't know. I'm not in charge of those, but I can tell you that we're going out there every day and doing what we can.
And we appreciate it. And I want to thank you for the work you do, Daniel Hodges, and for coming on the program. Much appreciated.
Sure thing. Thanks for having me.